Formula 1 has often struggled to break into the American market. Historically, the United States has produced several successful drivers, but in more recent years, investment and interest in Formula 1 has been superseded by domestic series like IndyCar and NASCAR. In 2014, businessman Gene Haas decided to spread his influence out from his eponymous tool manufacturing company and NASCAR team and create a Formula 1 team of his own. This is the story of Haas F1 Team. Since the advent of the hybrid era in 2014, one of the main issues regarding the cars was their lack of downforce and torque, slowing the cars down, despite their incredibly powerful engines. So for 2017, technical changes were brought in to speed the cars up. The car's total width was increased from 71 to 79 inches. The bodywork width was increased from 55 to 63 inches. The width of the front wing was increased from 65 to 71 inches. The rear wing height was lowered from 37 to 31 inches, and the rear wing was also moved back 8 inches. The height of the diffuser was increased from 5 to 7 inches, the width was increased from 39 to 41 inches, and the leading edge was moved from the rear wheel centerline to 7 inches in front of it. As well as this, the width of the front tyres was increased from 9.6 to 12 inches, the width of the rear tyres was increased from 12.8 to 15.9 inches, and the diameter of all 4 tyres was increased from 26 to 26.4 inches. The weight of the cars increased by 26 kilograms as a result of this, and the fuel capacity increased by 5 kilograms to compensate. A T-wing device on the engine cover was adopted by most teams to increase downforce even further. All in all, lap times dropped by about 5 seconds compared to 2016, but as a consequence, the increased downforce created increasingly turbulent air behind the cars that would make it harder for other cars to follow and overtake them. Haas's debut season had been a reasonably strong one. They had been a solid midfield team, and for 2017 they aimed to make more regular top 10 appearances and to rectify their reliability issues with the brakes and the front wing. Romain Grosjean retained his seat after several impressive performances. Esteban Gutierrez failed to score a single point and lost his seat and was replaced with Kevin Magnussen, who came over from Renault. 2 pre-season testing sessions at Catalunya were planned for 2017 from February 27th to March 2nd and March 7th to 10th. The day before the first test, the team unveiled their 2017 challenger, the VF17. The car was once again designed in collaboration with Dallara, and again included a Ferrari gearbox, power unit and suspension. On launch, the car did not feature the T-wing seen on most other cars that year, but did have a shark fin engine cover. There was also a small revision on their 2016 livery, with the silver darkened to a gunmetal grey. Magnussen went out on the first day and completed 51 laps to go 4th fastest, but had a brief foray into the barriers in the morning. Magnussen drove again on day 2 and was 4th fastest again with 118 laps, and the team also added a T-wing to the car. Grosjean went out on day 3 and went 8th fastest with 56 laps. The track was deliberately wetted on the 4th and final day, and Grosjean went 4th fastest and completed by far the most laps with 118. Magnussen went out again on the first day of the second test and went 8th fastest with 81 laps. Grosjean drove on the second day and went 10th fastest with 96 laps. Magnussen then went 5th fastest on day 3 with 119 laps, and Grosjean went 10th fastest on the 4th and final day with 76 laps completed. The season began as ever in Melbourne with the Australian Grand Prix. Grosjean went 8th in FP1, but Magnussen struggled and was down in 17th. After FP1, the team were ordered by the stewards to remove the T-wing from the engine due to its excessive flexing. Grosjean went 8th in FP2, but Magnussen lost running due to a water leak and was down in 19th. The T-wing was put back on for FP3. Both drivers improved over their qualifying runs, and Grosjean went 7th and Magnussen 10th. In qualifying, Grosjean comfortably advanced into Q2 by going 10th in Q1. Magnussen struggled further as he hadn't yet run on the ultra-soft tyre and went off at turn 12 on both laps. He was 1.4 seconds slower and lined up 17th. Grosjean improved further in Q2 to go 8th fastest and advance into Q3, and then improved yet again to qualify an astonishing 6th. On race day, the Red Bull of Daniel Ricciardo started from the pit lane, which moved Magnussen up to 16th. The team ran a split strategy as Grosjean started on ultra-soft tyres and Magnussen on softs. A needless second formation lap was triggered due to the Toro Rosso of Daniel Kvyat and the Force India of Sergio Perez being slightly out of position. The Williams of Felipe Massa passed Grosjean around the outside of turn 1. Magnussen passed the deputising Sauber of Antonio Giovinazzi off the line and then passed his teammate Marcus Ericsson at turn 1. Ericsson tried to repass Magnussen at turn 3, but Magnussen caught the inside curb and collided with him and sent both of them into the gravel trap and lost his front wing. Ericsson carried on in 18th and Magnussen crawled round to the pits for a new front ring and a set of soft tyres for a long test run and rejoined far behind in 19th, but still ahead of Ricciardo, who didn't leave the Red Bull garages until the second lap. Magnussen was first lapped on lap 8. Grosjean was dropping away from Massa in front but pulling away from the Toro Rosso of Carlos Sainz behind. He then suddenly lost power due to a water leak on lap 14 and pulled into the garages to become the first retirement of 2017. The Renault of Jolly and Palmer retired on lap 17, which moved Magnussen up to 17th. Ericsson then retired on lap 22, which moved him up to 16th. Ricciardo retired from behind him on lap 26, leaving him last. He was lapped for a second time on lap 37. The Williams of Lance Stroll retired on lap 41, which moved Magnussen up to 15th, and he then suffered a suspension failure at turn 12 on lap 47 and was told by the team to pull over to give the team a season opening double retirement, though it later transpired that he had front right puncture and could have pitted for a new set of tyres and would have finished 14th if he'd seen the checkered flag. Formula 1 then travelled to the Far East for the Chinese Grand Prix. The team brought some small revisions to the front wing. Low clouds and rain trapping in the Shanghai smog created poor visibility in FP1, and the session was red flagged only 4 minutes in and did not resume for another 40 minutes, before being red flagged again and then finally called off with 5 minutes remaining. FP2 was abandoned completely as the medical helicopter did not have clearance to land at the local hospital. The sky and the air cleared on Saturday. Magnussen advanced into Q2 by going 12th fastest. Grosjean span exiting turn 15 on his first run and just avoided the barriers. He was set to avoid elimination on his second run, but Giovinazzi then crashed at the final corner and so he slowed for the yellow flags and qualified 17th. Grosjean was then given a 5-place grid penalty as the stewards had deemed him to have made no attempts to slow down. Grosjean tried presenting telemetry data showing that he did, but the penalty stood and he lined up 19th ahead of Palmer, who also received the same penalty. Magnussen improved by 8 tenths in Q2 but remained 12th. The rain returned for Sunday, so all drivers started on intermediate tyres except for Sainz on super softs. Magnussen had a poor start and was passed by the McLarens of Fernando Alonso and Stoffel Vandoorne, Ericsson and the Red Bull of Max Verstappen off the line, but in turn passed an even poorer starting Sainz. Grosjean passed Sainz and Giovinazzi off the line. The Force India of Esteban Ocon then passed Magnussen at turn 1. Giovinazzi repassed Grosjean at turn 4. Magnussen then passed Ocon at turn 6 and Grosjean repassed Giovinazzi there. He tried to pass Ocon as well but had his right barge board taken off. Magnussen then passed Ericsson at turn 10. Perez and Stroll collided there, which took Stroll out of the race and gave both drivers a place. Magnussen then passed Vandoorne at turn 11 but was repassed by Ericsson there. Grosjean passed Vandoorne down the back straight and Magnussen repassed Ericsson at turn 16, leaving Magnussen 12th and Grosjean 15th at the end of lap 1. The Renault of Nico Hülkenberg pitted for dry tyres at the end of lap 1, which gave both drivers a place. The virtual safety car was deployed on lap 2 to clear Stroll's car. A dry line had formed already, so Magnussen and Grosjean pitted for super soft tyres alongside numerous other drivers and rejoined in 14th and 19th. Palmer had pitted for dry tyres at the end of the formation lap and span at turn 1 on lap 3 and was passed by Magnussen. The virtual safety car then ended. Magnussen passed Perez at turn 14, but Perez took the place back at turn 16. Giovinazzi crashed out on the start-finish straight on lap 4 and the safety car was then deployed, and the drivers were redirected through the pit lane. Grosjean pitted again on lap 5 for a set of soft tyres. The Mercedes of Valtteri Bottas span in between turns 10 and 11 on lap 7 while warming his tyres up and resumed behind Magnussen. The race resumed at the end of lap 7. Grosjean passed Ericsson at turn 1. Magnussen passed Massa at turn 6 and then Kvyat at turn 13. Perez stormed away in front of Magnussen and Kvyat quickly fell behind, leaving Magnussen on his own. Grosjean passed a struggling Vandoorne on lap 16, who then retired. A recovering Bottas passed Magnussen at turn 14 on lap 18. Kvyat then retired on lap 19, which moved Grosjean up to 15th. Perez pitted on lap 20, which moved Magnussen back up to 9th. Massa pitted on lap 24 and rejoined behind Grosjean. Grosjean then caught and passed Palmer at turn 6 on lap 27. Magnussen pitted for a set of used super soft tyres on lap 32 and rejoined in 12th behind Hülkenberg. Grosjean was lapped on lap 33. Hulkenberg then pitted on lap 33, which moved Grosjean up to 12th. Alonso retired on lap 34, which gave both drivers a place. Grosjean pitted for a second set of super soft tyres on lap 35 and rejoined behind Hulkenberg in 13th. He then passed Hulkenberg at turn 6 on lap 38. Magnussen passed Ocon down the back straight on lap 39. He then chased down Perez at more than a second per lap and passed him at turn 14 on lap 48. Grosjean passed Massa at turn 2 on the same lap. Massa was lapped on lap 53 and finished in 8th, with Grosjean 34 seconds behind in 11th. By scoring their first points of the year, Haas moved up to 7th in the Constructors' Championship, and by both getting a finish under their belt, Magnussen and Grosjean moved up to 10th and 14th in the Drivers' Championship respectively. Next up was the Bahrain Grand Prix. Friday ran without any problems, but Grosjean crashed at turn 4 in FP3 after struggling with balance, which brought out the red flags. Grosjean went 11th fastest in Q1 to comfortably advance into Q2, but Magnussen went out late to take advantage of improved track conditions, but Sainz stopped at the final turn in his hot lap, so he had to back off and lined up 20th and last. Grosjean then scraped into Q3 by fewer than 0.04 of a second and then qualified 9th. Both drivers started the race on super soft tyres. Van Dorn had a power unit issue and did not start the race, which moved Magnussen up to 19th. Magnussen passed Ericsson at turn 1 and the returning Sauber of Pascal Wehrlein at turn 4. Grosjean got sandwiched in between Hulkenberg and Kvyat at turn 8 but maintained position. Kvyat then locked up at turn 14 and rejoined in last to leave Magnussen 16th at the end of lap 1. Stroll pitted on lap 8, which gave a place to Magnussen, but Magnussen then completely lost power at turn 7 on lap 9 and pulled over and out of the race. The Ferrari of Sebastian Vettel pitted on lap 10 and Verstappen on lap 11, which gave Grosjean 2 places. Verstappen then went into the barriers at turn 4 on lap 12 with a brake failure. Grosjean pitted for a second set of super soft tyres on lap 12 and rejoined in 13th. Stroll and Sainz collided at turn 1 on lap 13 and took each other out of the race, which brought out the safety car. All drivers who hadn't pitted except for Ericsson then did, and Alonso, Palmer and Kvyat rejoined behind Grosjean, which moved him up to 10th. The race resumed at the end of lap 16. Grosjean passed Ericsson at turn 4 on lap 17. He was sandwiched in between Hulkenberg and Ocon for the entire second stint, before pitting for a second time for a set of soft tyres on lap 31 and rejoining in 14th. He passed Wehrlein at turn 11 on lap 34, Palmer at turn 1 on lap 35 and Alonso at turn 4 on lap 36. He successfully undercut Hulkenberg, who pitted on lap 36 and rejoined 10 seconds behind. Ocon then pitted on lap 37, which gave him another place, and he then passed Kvyat at turn 1 on lap 38. Perez pulled away in front and Hulkenberg closed in from behind but ran out of time to catch Grosjean and he finished a solid 8th. As a result of this, Haas stayed 7th in the Constructors' Championship despite doubling their points tally, and Grosjean displaced Magnussen to go 10th in the Drivers' Championship. A few days after the race, a 2-day in-season test was held at Sakhir. Grosjean ran on the first day and Magnussen on the second, and the team experimented with new carbon industry brakes. Next up was the Russian Grand Prix. Magnussen just scraped into Q2 with the 15th fastest time in Q1. Grosjean had been struggling with balance all weekend. He switched back to Brembo brakes for Saturday and then went 20th after his first run, and once again got caught out by yellow flags in the final sector of his final run, this time caused by Wehrlein and Palmer. Magnussen improved marginally in Q2 to qualify 14th. Grid penalties for Sainz and Van Dorn moved both drivers up one place. On race day, both drivers started on ultra soft tyres. Alonso broke down on the formation lap, which moved Grosjean up to 18th and triggered a second formation lap. Both drivers had good starts, as Magnussen passed Kvyat and Ocon on the run to turn 2 and Grosjean passed Ericsson. Ocon repassed Magnussen at turn 2, who was forced to cut the corner at turn 3. Grosjean went down the inside of Palmer at turn 2, but Palmer turned in on him and they locked wheels, which put Palmer into a spin and sent him into the side of Grosjean. They locked wheels again, which sent Grosjean airborne and into the barriers. Stroll span at turn 6, which moved Magnussen up to 11th, and the safety car was then brought out. The race resumed at the end of lap 3. Ricciardo retired on lap 5, which moved Magnussen into the points. On lap 8, he was given a 5-second time penalty for cutting the corner at turn 2 on lap 1. Magnussen fell away from Hulkenberg in front during the first stint and was being pressured by Sainz behind. He pitted for a set of super soft tyres on lap 21, took his 5-second time penalty and rejoined in 14th, behind Kvyat, who pitted at the same time. He was lapped on lap 24. Van Dorn then pitted, which moved him up a place. He dropped away from Kvyat in the final stint and finished a disappointing race for the team in 13th. Both drivers dropped 2 places in the Drivers' Championship. At the Spanish Grand Prix, the team confirmed that Santino Ferrucci would remain in their driver development programme and had been joined by 19-year-old Indian GP3 Series driver Arjun Maini. Grosjean and Magnussen both made it into Q2, with Magnussen qualifying 11th and Grosjean 2/10 slower in 14th, though they both felt they were fast enough for Q3. Both drivers started the race on soft tyres. Magnussen was passed by Hülkenberg at turn 1. Bottas, the Ferrari of Kimi Raikkonen and Verstappen all collided at turn 2, which took Raikkonen and Verstappen out of the race. Grosjean was blocked by them, rejoining the track, and was passed by Wehrlein. Alonso and Massa collided there as well, which sent Alonso onto the gravel trap and gave Massa a puncture. Both drivers passed a hobbling Massa at turn 5. Grosjean then passed Wehrlein at turn 10, leaving Magnussen 8th and Grosjean 10th at the end of lap 1. Magnussen was being pressured by Sainz, who attempted to pass at turn 1 on lap 4. Magnussen pitted along with Sainz on lap 13 for a second set of soft tyres and rejoined in 12th. Sainz tried to pass him on the pit exit, but Magnussen pushed him onto the grass. Magnussen then passed Kvyat at turn 1 on lap 15. Hülkenberg pitted on lap 15 and Ocon on lap 16, which moved Grosjean up to 6th. Ericsson and Perez pitted on lap 18, which moved Grosjean up to 5th and Magnussen up to 10th. Grosjean pitted for a second set of soft tyres on lap 19 and rejoined in 11th. Both drivers continued to sandwich Sainz throughout the second stint. Massa and Van Dorn in 14th and 15th collided at turn 1 on lap 33, which took Van Dorn out of the race and brought out the virtual safety car. Magnussen then pitted for a set of medium tyres alongside Hülkenberg and Wehrlein 2 paces ahead, who would run a long first stint and not yet pitted. Grosjean pitted the following lap for a set of medium tyres alongside Sainz, who rejoined in front of Magnussen. The virtual safety car ended on lap 36. Bottas retired on lap 39, which put both drivers in the points. Both drivers were then lapped. Wehrlein in 7th was creating a train behind, which allowed Kvyat to close up and pass Grosjean at turn 1 on lap 43. Magnussen started to drift away from Sainz towards the end of the race. Kvyat passed him at turn 1 on lap 63. Magnussen came back at him at turn 4 and hit Kvyat's side pod and was given a left rear puncture from Kvyat's front wing. He was repassed by Kvyat at turn 7 and then Grosjean at turn 10 and pitted for a set of soft tyres and rejoined in 14th and lapped for a second time, but allowed Grosjean to take a solitary point for the team. Wehrlein's 8th place finish meant Magnussen went down to 14th in the Drivers' Championship. It was now time for the 75th running of the Monaco Grand Prix. For this, the team unveiled a new variation on their livery, with most of the red highlights being changed to a light grey. They also brought a new double-planed T-wing and some small revisions to the front wing. Both drivers comfortably advanced into Q2, with Magnussen going 9th fastest, only half a second off the fastest time. Grosjean improved by half a second in Q2 to go a stunning 6th, but Magnussen continuously got traffic and lined up 13th. Grosjean lost a little time in Q3 and qualified 8th. Grid penalties for Van Dorn and a returning McLaren of Jenson Button moved Magnussen up to 11th. Both drivers started on ultra-soft tyres. Magnussen had a fantastic start and passed Hülkenberg and Kvyat off the line and almost passed Grosjean at Saint-Devoux. Both drivers slowly dropped away from Perez in front during the first stint. Perez pitted on lap 16 for a new front wing, which gave both drivers a place. They continued to drift away from Sainz in front. Sainz pitted on lap 37 along with Magnussen, who then put on a set of super soft tyres and rejoined in 11th just behind Massa. Massa then pitted on lap 38, which put him back in the points. Grosjean pitted on lap 40 for a set of super soft tyres and rejoined in 9th just in front of Kvyat. Magnussen developed a puncture on lap 42 and pitted for a second set of ultra soft tyres and rejoined in 13th. Van Dorn pitted on lap 43, which moved Grosjean up to 8th. The Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, who had started 13th, pitted from 6th on lap 46 and rejoined 2.5 seconds in front of Grosjean. Magnussen was lapped on lap 55. Button and Wehrlein collided at Portier on lap 58, which flipped Wehrlein's car onto its side and brought out the safety car. Magnussen was permitted to unlap himself. The safety car was extended further by Ericsson crashing at Saint-Devoux on lap 64. The safety car came in at the end of lap 66. Van Dorn immediately crashed at Saint-Devoux as well, which gave Magnussen a place. Kvyat and Perez collided at Rascasse on lap 71, which gave Kvyat a puncture. Magnussen passed Kvyat on the run to Massenet. Perez then pitted for repairs on lap 72, which moved Magnussen up to 10th, which along with Grosjean's 8th meant the team did achieve their first ever double points finish. Magnussen moved back up to 13th in the Drivers' Championship, and the team remained 8th in the Constructors' Championship, but were now tied on points with Renault. Formula 1 then travelled across the Atlantic for the Canadian Grand Prix. Magnussen had traffic in Q1 and was caught out by yellow flags once again and qualified 18th. Grosjean was half a second faster in Q1 and then struggled for grip in Q2 and lined up 14th. Grosjean started on ultra soft tyres and Magnussen on super softs. Magnussen passed Stroll at turn 2. Carlos Sainz turned in on Grosjean on the run to turn 3, which broke Grosjean's front wing. Sainz then went across the grass and took out Felipe Massa at turn 3 as he went into the barriers. Grosjean went across the grass on the inside of turn 3 and was passed by Van Dorn, Palmer and Magnussen. Magnussen then passed Palmer at turn 5 and the safety car was brought out. Grosjean pitted alongside Wehrlein at the end of lap 1 for a set of super soft tyres and rejoined in 17th. The race resumed at the end of lap 3. Vettel pitted for a new front wing on lap 5 which gave both drivers a place. Wehrlein passed Grosjean at turn 12 on lap 7, but Grosjean repassed him there on lap 10. Verstappen retired on lap 11 which gave both drivers a place and the virtual safety car was brought out. Hülkenberg, Palmer and Ericsson pitted on lap 11 which moved Magnussen up to 10th and Grosjean to 13th. Magnussen passed Van Dorn on the start-finish straight on lap 14 and the virtual safety car then ended. Van Dorn took the place back at turn 2, but Magnussen passed him again at turn 3. Vettel then passed Grosjean at turn 12. Kvyat served a drive-through penalty on lap 15 which moved Magnussen up to 8th. Stroll attempted to pass him at turn 12 and Hülkenberg then passed Stroll and almost passed Magnussen at turn 1 on lap 17. Vettel then passed him at the Le Pont-Le hairpin on lap 21. On lap 25, Magnussen was awarded a 5-second time penalty for overtaking Van Dorn under the virtual safety car. Stroll then pitted which gave a place to Grosjean. Hülkenberg passed Magnussen on the back straight on lap 28. Kvyat then passed him at turn 1 on lap 30, putting him out of the points. Stroll then passed Grosjean at turn 12 on lap 41. Alonso pitted on lap 41 and rejoined 6 seconds behind Magnussen. Van Dorn pitted on lap 45 which moved Grosjean up a place. Magnussen pitted for a set of ultra soft tyres on lap 46, served his time penalty and rejoined in 15th and lapped. Grosjean was then lapped on lap 47. Kvyat pitted on lap 53 and then retired a lap later which gave both drivers a place. Magnussen then passed Ericsson at turn 1 on lap 56 and started chasing down Palmer and Grosjean. Grosjean drifted away from Alonso in front, but Alonso then retired on lap 67 which meant Grosjean finished 10th and Magnussen just 1.5 seconds behind in 12th. It was now time for the inaugural Azerbaijan Grand Prix, being held at the Baku City circuit which the previous year had hosted the European Grand Prix. The team decided to remove the T-wing from the engine cover for this, as it had still been vibrating excessively at high speed ever since pre-season testing. They also added a monkey seat to the diffuser. Magnussen qualified 13th, but Grosjean was struggling with balance and grip once again and lost time at the weighbridge and was eliminated in Q1 and lined up 17th. Grid penalties for Sainz and Alonso moved both drivers up 1 place. For the race, Magnussen started on super soft tyres and Grosjean on softs. Kvyat locked up heavily at turn 1 and ran wide and was passed by Magnussen, but he was passed by Hülkenberg at the same time. Sainz then span which gave Grosjean a place. Bottas and Raikkonen collided at turn 2 which gave Bottas a puncture and he was passed by Magnussen on the run to turn 3 and Grosjean at turn 3, leaving Magnussen 11th and Grosjean 14th at the end of lap 1. Grosjean passed Wehrlein on the run to the start-finish line on lap 2. He then went straight on at turn 3 into the escape road and rejoined in 19th, with only Bottas behind who had just been lapped by Magnussen. He'd flat spotted his tyres so he pitted for a set of super soft tyres and was now far behind the field. Ricciardo pitted on lap 5 which moved Magnussen into the points. Van Dorn pitted as well on lap 5 and rejoined just in front of Grosjean. Palmer pitted to retire on lap 7 which gave Grosjean a place. Kvyat then retired on lap 10 which gave him another place. Kvyat's car was parked on the exit of turn 12 and the safety car was eventually brought out to retrieve it on lap 12. Magnussen pitted for a set of soft tyres along with most of the rest of the grid and rejoined in 9th. Verstappen pitted and retired, and Wehrlein pitting moved Grosjean up to 15th. Grosjean pitted for a second set of super soft tyres on lap 14 but stayed in 15th as Wehrlein pitted again the previous lap. The race resumed at the end of lap 16. Ricciardo passed Magnussen at turn 1. The safety car was brought out again after only half a lap as bits of bodywork had come off Raikkonen's car at turn 1 so the cars were redirected through the pit lane. Wehrlein pitted again on lap 17 which moved Grosjean up to 14th. The race resumed again at the end of lap 19. Perez and Ocon collided at turn 2 which broke Perez's front wing and gave Ocon a puncture and they were both passed by Magnussen and Grosjean on the run to turn 3. Raikkonen as well received a puncture from the debris and was passed by Magnussen at turn 4 and Grosjean at turn 5. The safety car was then brought out for the third time with both drivers now in the points. The race was then red flagged on lap 22 and the drivers lined up in the pit lane. The race resumed 24 minutes later behind the safety car with Magnussen in 7th on a set of super soft tyres and Grosjean in 10th on a third set of super soft tyres. The safety car came in at the end of lap 23. Magnussen passed Massa and Hülkenberg at the same time at turn 1 on lap 25. Hülkenberg then clipped the inside wall at turn 7 and broke his suspension and parked in the escape road at turn 8, which gave a place to Grosjean. Grosjean then passed a limping Massa at turn 16, who then retired and moved him up to 8th. Ocon then passed Grosjean at turn 1 on lap 26, and Bottas then passed him at turn 4. Perez then unlapped Grosjean at turn 1 on lap 27, and Raikkonen unlapped him there on lap 28. Both drivers were losing time to the cars in front. Race leader Hamilton pitted on lap 31 to fix his headrest, which moved Grosjean up to 4th. New race leader Vettel then served a 10-second stop-go penalty on lap 33 for deliberately driving into Hamilton during the second safety car, which moved Magnussen up to unprecedented 3rd. Grosjean was experiencing severe brake fade and was passed by Ericsson and Verlaine on lap 36, and then pitted to inspect the brakes and put on a 4th set of super soft tyres and rejoined in 13th. Ocon passed Magnussen just before the start-finish line on lap 37, and Bottas then passed him at turn 1 on lap 38. Vettel then passed Magnussen at turn 1 on lap 39, and Hamilton then passed him at turn 2. Magnussen then ran alone for the rest of the race and finished a season best 7th, while Grosjean was lapped on lap 47 and finished in 13th. A podium for Stroll moved Grosjean down to 14th in the Drivers' Championship, while Magnussen displaced him to go 13th, and the team moved ahead of Renault to go 7th in the Constructors' Championship. Next up was the Austrian Grand Prix. Grosjean got a puncture for the notoriously hard curbs during FP1, but they were both setting times within the top 10. Grosjean went 8th fastest in Q1 and Magnussen 12th. Magnussen then broke his suspension on a curb and did not set a time in Q2 and lined up 15th. Grosjean then went 7th in Q2 and then 7th once again in Q3. A grid penalty for Hamilton moved him up to 6th, matching his season's best from Australia. Grosjean started the race on ultra soft tyres and Magnussen on super softs. Grosjean immediately passed a poor starting Verstappen off the line, and Magnussen passed a poor starting Hülkenberg and then passed Kvyat on the run to the Niki Lauda curve and came up alongside Sainz and Van Dorn. Kvyat hit Alonso in front, who spun into Verstappen and took both of them out of the race. Magnussen and Van Dorn were forced onto the runoff area and Magnussen rejoined back in 15th. Ricciardo pushed Raikkonen wide at Remus, which allowed Grosjean to pass him. Magnussen passed Marcus Ericsson at Remus as well. Grosjean then attempted to pass Ricciardo around the outside of Schlossgold, and Magnussen passed Van Dorn there as well, leaving Grosjean 4th and Magnussen 13th at the end of lap 1. Raikkonen attempted to pass Grosjean around the outside of Schlossgold on lap 2, and Magnussen passed Palmer there. Raikkonen then did pass Grosjean at Schlossgold on lap 3. Magnussen passed Sainz at Remus on lap 6. Hamilton passed Grosjean at Schlossgold on lap 8. The leaders then pulled away from Grosjean, who concentrated on holding Perez behind while Magnussen pressured Stroll in front. Magnussen continued to pressure Stroll during the first stint, but then suffered a complete hydraulic failure on lap 29 and pulled into the pits to retire. Perez pitted from 3 seconds behind Grosjean on lap 35, and Grosjean pitted for a set of super soft tyres the following lap but rejoined in front in 8th. Ocon pitted on lap 42 and Massa on lap 47, which moved Grosjean back up to 6th, and he held off Perez and just avoided being lapped to get a new season's best result for himself and the team, and displaced Magnussen again to go 13th in the Drivers' Championship. It was now time for the team's unofficial second home race, the British Grand Prix. Here it was announced that Ferrari reserve driver Antonio Giovinazzi, who had done 2 races for Sauber at the beginning of the season, would be doing Friday practice sessions for Haas for the remainder of the season, and so he took Magnussen's seat in FP1. The team also once again experimented with carbon industry brakes on Grosjean's car while Magnussen kept the Brembos. Rain came just in time for qualifying, so everyone did Q1 on intermediate tyres. Magnussen struggled and qualified 17th. The track dried for Q2 and Grosjean just scraped into Q3, but was blocked by Hamilton on his first run and then made a mistake on his second and qualified 10th. A grid penalty for Alonso moved Magnussen up to 16th. Race day was dry, and Grosjean started on super soft tyres and Magnussen on softs. Palmer broke down on the formation lap and pulled over on the hangar straight, which moved Magnussen up to 15th and triggered a second formation lap. Ericsson passed Magnussen at Arena. He then repassed him down the Wellington straight and then passed Sainz at Brooklands, who then repassed him at Luffield. Magnussen then passed Grosjean at Copse. Kvyat and Sainz collided in front of Magnussen at Beckett's, which took Sainz out of the race, who also very lightly clipped Magnussen's right rear wheel, leaving Grosjean 11th and Magnussen 13th at the end of lap 1. The safety car was brought out on lap 2 and came back in at the end of lap 4. Ricciardo immediately passed Magnussen at Club. Alonso then passed Magnussen at Brooklands. Ricciardo ran wide at Luffield, which moved Magnussen back up to 14th. Ricciardo repassed Magnussen at Luffield on lap 8 and went on to pass Grosjean at Stowe on lap 14. Ocon and Alonso pitted on lap 20, which moved Grosjean up to 11th and Magnussen to 13th. Stroll then pitted on lap 22, which moved Magnussen up to 12th, 4 seconds behind Grosjean. Grosjean then pitted for a set of soft tyres on lap 23 and rejoined in 15th. Perez pitted at the same time, which moved Magnussen up to 10th. Massa and Van Dorn pitted on laps 25 and 26, which gave Magnussen 2 more places. Grosjean passed Wehrlein at Club on lap 27. Ericsson pitted on lap 28, which gave Grosjean another place. Ricciardo pitted on lap 32, which moved Magnussen up to 7th. He then passed Magnussen at Copse on lap 36. Magnussen did the longest first stint in the race and held off both Force Indias for 15 laps and pitted for a set of super soft tyres on lap 37 and rejoined in 14th and lapped, just behind Stroll and 10 seconds behind Grosjean. He then passed Stroll at Luffield on lap 39. Grosjean was then lapped on lap 39. Grosjean pitted for a second set of super soft tyres on lap 43 and rejoined in 14th, behind Ericsson. He tried to quickly pass Ericsson at Brooklands but was pushed on to the runoff. He then did pass him there on lap 45, and they finished a quiet race in 12th and 13th, their first race with no points since Russia. The final race before the summer break was the Hungarian Grand Prix. Giovinazzi ran in Magnussen's car in FP1 once again, but crashed at turn 11 50 minutes into the session, which meant Magnussen had reduced running in FP2. Grosjean barely scraped into Q2 with the 14th fastest time. Magnussen was only 1/100th of a second slower and had set an identical time to Perez, but as Perez had set his time first, he was classified ahead and Magnussen qualified 16th, with Grosjean then dropping down to 15th in Q2. A grid penalty for Kvyat moved both drivers up a place. Both drivers started the race on super soft tyres. Grosjean made contact with Hülkenberg around the outside of turn 1 and briefly went airborne and was passed by Magnussen, Kvyat and Stroll. Magnussen passed Hülkenberg at turn 2 and Ericsson passed Grosjean there. Hülkenberg took the place back at turn 3 and Ricciardo then spun in front of Magnussen, who he narrowly avoided. The safety car was then brought out with Magnussen 13th and Grosjean 17th. Ericsson pitted at the end of lap 1, which gave Grosjean a place. The safety car came in at the end of lap 5. A train formed behind Magnussen in the first stint, who dropped away from Hülkenberg in front. Grosjean develops a slow puncture on lap 20 and pitted for a set of soft tyres and rejoined in 19th and last. However, he got across the red on the left rear wheel nut and pulled over at turn 11. Magnussen pitted for soft tyres on lap 31 and rejoined behind Kvyat in 14th. Kvyat pitted on lap 40, which moved him back up to 13th. Hülkenberg and Palmer pitted on laps 45 and 46 and were both undercut by Magnussen. Hülkenberg quickly closed up to him and tried to pass him around the outside of turn 1 on lap 51. He continued to pressure Magnussen, who got a bit of respite as Hülkenberg was lapped on lap 56 and Magnussen on lap 57. Hülkenberg closed up again and tried to pass Magnussen around the outside of turn 2 on lap 60, but Magnussen pushed him wide and he went across the grass and dropped behind Kvyat. Magnussen then held off Kvyat for the rest of the race and finished 11th, but was awarded a 5-second time penalty on the last lap for forcing Hülkenberg off the track and dropped down to 13th. Magnussen and Hülkenberg had a widely publicised spat in the media pen after the race, where Hülkenberg interrupted one of Magnussen's interviews and called him the most unsportsmanlike driver on the grid, and Magnussen told him to, quote, suck his balls. A couple of days after the race, a young drivers' test was held at the Hungaroring. Haas ran development driver Santino Ferrucci on both days. Haas went into the summer break 7th in the Constructors' Championship with 29 points, 3 points ahead of Renault. Grosjean was 13th in the Drivers' Championship with 18 points and Magnussen was 14th with 11. The first race after the summer break was the Belgian Grand Prix. There was a small change to the car's livery, with the grey stripe replaced with a red one. They also brought new rear wing mounts and a new monkey seat on the diffuser. Both drivers advanced into Q2 with Grosjean qualifying 12th and Magnussen a quarter of a second slower in 13th. A grid penalty for Palmer moved both drivers up one place. Both drivers started the race on ultra soft tyres. Magnussen had the better start and passed Grosjean at La Source. Palmer almost passed Grosjean on the run to Eau Rouge. Magnussen ran side by side with Perez down the Kemmel Straight and passed him at Les Combes. Perez repassed him there on lap 3. Grosjean then passed him there on lap 4 and then passed Alonso there on lap 6 to put himself back in the points. Verstappen retired on lap 8, which gave both drivers a place. Magnussen pitted for a set of soft tyres on lap 9 and rejoined in 15th. Grosjean then pitted for a set of soft tyres on lap 10 along with Alonso and rejoined in 13th, with Magnussen undercutting Alonso. Massa pitted on lap 10, which gave both drivers a place. Perez pitted on lap 12 and was undercut by Grosjean as well. Grosjean passed Kvyat down the Kemmel Straight on lap 14, but Perez passed him at the same time. Magnussen then passed Van Dorn at Lecum on lap 16. Kvyat pitted on lap 17 and Sainz on lap 18, which put both drivers in the points. Perez pitted on lap 25 and Ocon on lap 27, which put both drivers up to 7th and 8th. Ocon and Perez then collided on the run to Eau Rouge on lap 29, which broke Ocon's front wing and gave Perez a puncture, which brought out the safety car. Grosjean pitted for a set of super soft tyres along with most of the rest of the grid and stayed in 7th. Magnussen pitted the following lap also for super soft tyres and rejoined behind Massa in 9th. The safety car came in at the end of lap 33. Magnussen locked up heavily on cold brakes for the bus stop chicane and flat spotted both tyres. Ocon and Sainz both passed him at La Source. Stroll and Perez then passed him at Lecum. He then ran wide at Pouhon and dropped down to last. He pitted for a second set of ultra soft tyres and rejoined far behind the field. Perez retired on lap 42, which moved him up to 16th. He closed up to the field and passed Ericsson at Lecum on the final lap to finish 15th, while Grosjean finished a solid 7th, in what could have been a double points finish. With this, Grosjean moved up to 11th in the Drivers' Championship, but Renault were now only 1 point behind in the Constructors' Championship. Next was another unofficial home race, the Italian Grand Prix. Giovinazzi was meant to take Magnussen's seat in FP1, but due to the expected rain disrupting the other sessions, this was called off. The expected rain came as a deluge on Saturday morning, and FP3 was delayed by 44 minutes and neither driver went out. Qualifying started on time despite the rain not subsiding. Grosjean went out first, set a sighter lap time and then aquaplaned and crashed on the main straight on his hot lap and the session was red flagged. It was more than 2 hours before the session resumed. Magnussen made a late switch to intermediates but was still eliminated and qualified 16th. Grosjean received a needless 5-place grid penalty for a gearbox change, and grid penalties for Sainz, Alonso, Hülkenberg, Perez, Van Dorn, Ricciardo and Verstappen moved Magnussen up to 9th. Race day was dry and sunny, so both drivers started on super soft tyres. Perez and Verstappen passed Magnussen off the line and Grosjean passed Palmer and Alonso at Variante del Rettifilo but hit Raikkonen in front and damaged his front wing. Magnussen then passed Kvyat through Curva Grande. Grosjean then passed Wehrlein at the first Lesbo but was repassed by Alonso at Parabolica. Grosjean's front wing broke on the second lap. He was passed by Wehrlein at Variante del Rettifilo on lap 3. Verstappen got a puncture at Variante del Rettifilo and was passed by Magnussen at Variante della Roggia. Palmer then passed Grosjean there. Grosjean passed Verstappen at the Ascari chicane and both drivers pitted with Grosjean putting on a set of soft tyres and a new front wing and rejoining in 19th. Ricciardo passed Magnussen at Variante della Roggia on lap 7. Magnussen pitted for a set of soft tyres on lap 41 and rejoined in 17th. Sainz pitted on lap 13 which moved him up a place. Verstappen passed Grosjean at Variante del Rettifilo on lap 15. Magnussen passed Wehrlein at the Ascari chicane on lap 17 and Ericsson at the second Lesmo on lap 18. Ericsson then pitted and rejoined behind Grosjean. Kvyat pitted on lap 19 which moved Magnussen up to 13th and Grosjean was lapped. Wehrlein pitted on lap 20 which moved Grosjean up to 18th. Palmer pitted on lap 25 which moved Magnussen up to 12th and rejoined just in front of Grosjean. Verstappen pitted on lap 27 and rejoined behind Grosjean. Palmer then retired on lap 29 which moved Grosjean up to 16th. Alonso pitted on lap 30 which moved Magnussen up to 11th. Verstappen then passed Grosjean again at Variante del Rettifilo on lap 31, but Grosjean locked up and hit Verstappen and damaged his front wing end plate. Van Dorn retired on lap 33 which gave both drivers a place and put Magnussen back in the points, but he was being pressured by Hülkenberg and Kvyat behind. Grosjean pitted for a second set of super softs on lap 34 and rejoined behind Wehrlein in 17th. He quickly passed him at Variante del Rettifilo on lap 37. Magnussen was lapped on lap 41. He continued to hold off Hülkenberg and Kvyat, but was passed by a charging Verstappen at Variante del Rettifilo on lap 46 and finished in 11th. Alonso retired on lap 50 which gave Grosjean 15th. Next was the lights of the Singapore Grand Prix. Giovinazzi took Magnussen's seat in FP1. Qualifying was a struggle as Magnussen was eliminated in Q1 after getting traffic at the final corner and lined up 16th. Grosjean just scraped into Q2 but was over a second off the next car in 15th. Rain came before the start of the race, so Grosjean started on intermediates, but Magnussen went for full wets as they were found to better get up to temperature in Monza. Magnussen had the better start and passed Grosjean off the line and then passed Kvyat. Vettel, Verstappen and Raikkonen collided on the run to turn 1. Raikkonen and Verstappen collided again at turn 1 and also hit Alonso which took Raikkonen and Verstappen out of the race. Grosjean was passed by Massa at turn 1 and Stroll at turn 2. Alonso rejoined 2 places behind Magnussen. Vettel then span out of the race at turn 5 and the safety car was brought out with Magnussen in 10th and Grosjean 15th. The cars were redirected through the pit lane and the safety car came in at the end of lap 4. Alonso retired on lap 7, which moved Grosjean up to 14th. Both drivers were losing time to the cars in front. Kvyat passed Magnussen at turn 5 on lap 11 and then crashed out at turn 7, which brought out the safety car for a second time. Magnussen pitted for a set of intermediate tyres and rejoined at 15th and last. Ocon also pitted, which moved Grosjean up to 11th. Ericsson pitted on lap 12, which gave Magnussen a place. The race resumed at the end of lap 14. Magnussen passed Wehrlein at turn 4. Grosjean passed Massa at turn 7 on lap 16, who was still on wet tyres. Magnussen then passed Ocon at turn 14 and almost put him in the wall, and then Massa at turn 6 on lap 15 and in turn was almost put in the wall after touching wheels. He then locked up at turn 7 and was repassed by Massa, but took the place back again at turn 8 and was then almost repassed by Ocon at turn 9 and once again almost put him in the wall. The track had dried out, so Magnussen pitted for a set of ultra soft tyres on lap 24 and rejoined at 13th. Stroll pitted on lap 26, which moved Grosjean up to 9th. Ocon and Wehrlein pitted on lap 27, which moved Magnussen up to 11th. Grosjean also pitted for a set of ultra soft tyres and rejoined just behind him. Magnussen was then ordered to let Grosjean through on lap 33. Ocon then passed him at turn 1 on lap 44 as he caught a wet patch. Ericsson crashed out on lap 38, which brought out the safety car for a third time. Hülkenberg pitted on lap 38, which moved Grosjean up to 9th. Magnussen pitted for a second set of ultra soft tyres. The safety car came in at the end of lap 40. Massa passed Magnussen at turn 7. He then locked up there again on lap 42 and narrowly avoided the barriers. Hülkenberg retired on lap 48, which moved him back up to 12th, but he then retired on lap 51 with an MG UK failure. The race ended 3 laps early due to the 2-hour time limit being reached and Grosjean went on to finish 9th. Despite this, the team dropped behind Renault to 8th in the Constructors' Championship. Next was the last ever Malaysian Grand Prix. Heavy rain delayed FP1 by 30 minutes, and Giovinazzi once again took Magnussen's seat. FP2 was dry, but Grosjean hit a loose drain cover 20 minutes before the end of the session, which destroyed his right rear tyre and sent him into the barriers and red flagged the session. Under the circumstances, the team were allowed to work on Grosjean's car outside of Parc Ferme in order to have it ready for Saturday. The team suffered their worst qualifying of the year as both drivers were eliminated in Q1. They narrowly beat both Saubers and also Vettel, who failed to set a time and lined up 16th and 17th. Both drivers started the race on super soft tyres. Raikkonen failed to start the race, which moved both drivers up a place. Both drivers passed a rookie Toro Rosso of Pierre Gasly on the run to turn 1. Gasly repassed Grosjean there. Magnussen however passed Sainz and Palmer at turn 1. Magnussen then passed Alonso at turn 4 and Grosjean tried to repass Gasly there but was pushed wide and went down to 19th and last. Hülkenberg caught the grass on the exit of turn 15, which moved Magnussen up to 10th at the end of lap 1. Grosjean passed Ericsson at turn 4 on lap 2. Ocon pitted, which gave both drivers a place. Grosjean then passed Wehrlein on the start-finish straight. A train quickly formed behind Magnussen and a charging Vettel passed him at turn 15 on lap 9. Hülkenberg then pitted, which gave Grosjean a place. Magnussen pitted for a set of soft tyres on lap 10 and rejoined in 18th. Grosjean did the same the following lap and rejoined in 19th and last. Gasly pitted on lap 12 and Jolyon Palmer on lap 13, which gave Magnussen 2 places, and he then passed Ericsson on the start-finish straight on lap 14. Magnussen passed Wehrlein at turn 1 on lap 18 and Grosjean passed Ericsson at turn 15. Alonso pitted on lap 26, which moved Magnussen up to 12th. Hülkenberg then passed him at turn 15 on lap 27 and Palmer passed him at turn 1 on lap 29. Sainz retired, which gave both drivers a place. Alonso then passed Magnussen at turn 1 on lap 32. Magnussen went back up the inside and tried to take the place back at turn 2 and they lightly touched. Grosjean pitted for a second set of super soft tyres on lap 33 and rejoined in 18th and last and lapped and repassed Ericsson at turn 15. Palmer spanned at turn 14 on lap 37 and rejoined right in front of Magnussen. Magnussen then tried to pass him at turn 15. Both drivers were lapped while going side by side down the start-finish straight. They lightly touched at turn 1 and Palmer spun again. Wehrlein then pitted, which gave a place to Grosjean. Grosjean closed up and passed Palmer at turn 1 on lap 49. Hülkenberg pitted on lap 50, which gave both drivers a place. Grosjean then passed Gasly at turn 1 on lap 54 and they finished in formation in 12th and 13th. Magnussen dropped down to 15th in the Drivers' Championship. Next up was the Japanese Grand Prix. Magnussen could only do 1 lap at a time during FP1 due to a water leak. Torrential rain then came in FP2, so neither driver set a time. Grosjean went 16th in Q1 after his first run, but then got a snap of oversteer at turn 5 and crashed on his second, which prevented anyone else improving. Magnussen advanced into Q2 and then qualified 13th. Grid penalties for Sainz, Palmer and Alonso moved both drivers up to 12th and 13th. Both drivers started the race on super soft tyres. Lance Stroll passed Grosjean at turn 1. Stoffel Vandoorne ran wide at turn 2 and was passed by both drivers. Raikkonen ran wide at the Spoon curve and was passed by both drivers. Grosjean also ran wide and was passed by Gasly, leaving Magnussen 10th and Grosjean 13th at the end of lap 1. Grosjean repassed Gasly at turn 1 on lap 2. Sainz crashed out on lap 1, so the safety car was brought out. The race resumed at the end of lap 3. Stroll ran wide at the Spoon curve on lap 4, which gave a place to Grosjean. Magnussen passed Vettel at the Casio triangle and Vettel then pitted to retire, which put both drivers in the points. Raikkonen then repassed Grosjean at turn 1 on lap 5 and then Magnussen at the Casio triangle. Ericsson crashed out on lap 8, which brought out the virtual safety car for 2 laps. Massa pitted on lap 17, which gave both drivers a place. Magnussen pitted for a second set of soft tyres on lap 19 and rejoined in 14th. Ocon and Perez pitted on laps 20 and 21, which moved Grosjean up to 7th. Gasly pitted on lap 22, which gave Magnussen a place. Grosjean then pitted for a set of soft tyres on lap 23 and rejoined just behind Magnussen in 13th. Alonso pitted on lap 25, which gave both drivers a place. Both drivers stayed together and pressured Massa through the second stint. Hülkenberg and Palmer pitted on laps 38 and 39, which gave both drivers 2 places and put both of them in the points. Magnussen eventually passed Massa at turn 2 on lap 42 and they touched wheels, which pushed Massa offline and allowed Grosjean through too. Stroll retired on lap 47, which brought out the virtual safety car for 3 laps, and the drivers finished 8th and 9th, in only their second double points finish of the season. Magnussen moved back up to 14th in the Drivers' Championship, and the team moved 1 point clear of Renault to go back up to 7th in the Constructors' Championship. It was now time for the team's home race, the United States Grand Prix. The team brought their final upgrades of the season, with tweaks to the barge boards and the floor. Rain came before FP1 and the track dried out during the session, and Grosjean's FP3 ended early after a spin into the gravel. Qualifying did not go well, as Magnussen had no grip and qualified 20th and last and then blocked Perez while he was on a hot lap. Grosjean made it into Q2 but was in turn blocked by Stroll and almost crashed. Grosjean then qualified 14th. Magnussen was given a needless 3-place grid penalty for impeding Perez, but further penalties for Verstappen, Vandoorne, Hülkenberg and a rookie Toro Rosso Brendan Hartley meant Grosjean started 12th and Magnussen 17th. Grosjean started the race on ultra soft tyres and Magnussen on super softs. Ericsson passed Grosjean at turn 1 and Magnussen passed Stroll at turn 2. Grosjean repassed Ericsson at turn 7. Magnussen tried to pass Wehrlein at turn 12 but he slid over the curbs and they banged wheels which sent Wehrlein wide and gave Magnussen a puncture. Both drivers called round to the pits and Magnussen put on a set of soft tyres and rejoined in 20th and last. Verstappen passed Grosjean at turn 1 on lap 2. Hülkenberg retired on lap 2 and then Wehrlein on lap 4, which moved Magnussen up to 18th. Hartley and Stroll pitted on laps 8 and 10, which gave Magnussen 2 more places. Perez then pitted on lap 12, which moved Grosjean up to 12th. Ricciardo retired on lap 12, which gave both drivers a place, and Ocon and Alonso then pitted, which moved Grosjean up to 9th. Grosjean pitted for a set of soft tyres on lap 16 and rejoined behind Magnussen in 15th. Grosjean passed Magnussen at turn 12 on lap 19. Ericsson pitted on lap 21, Alonso retired on lap 23 and Vandoorne pitted on lap 25, which moved both drivers up to 11th and 12th. Massa then pitted on lap 29 and rejoined behind Magnussen and put Grosjean in the points. Massa passed Magnussen at turn 1 on lap 32. Vandoorne then passed Magnussen at turn 12 on lap 35. Massa then passed Grosjean at turn 12 on lap 39, putting him back out of the points. Magnussen was lapped on lap 42 and Grosjean on lap 45. Magnussen was being lapped by Vettel at turn 12 on lap 46 when Ericsson tried to pass him at the same time and Magnussen turned in on him and they collided, which sent Magnussen into a spin. He rejoined just in front of Hartley in 15th. Hartley then passed him at turn 17, putting him in last. Magnussen pitted for a set of ultra soft tyres on lap 49 and was now far behind the field. Grosjean had had severe graining on his left front tyre during the second stint. Vandoorne passed him at turn 1 on lap 54, Stroll passed him at turn 11 and Hartley passed him at turn 17. He had asked to retire the car but his race engineer said no, and they finished a home race to forget in 14th and 16th, and the team dropped back down to 8th in the Constructors' Championship. Next was the Mexican Grand Prix. Giovinazzi ran in Grosjean's car in FP1. Grosjean then got only 3 laps in FP2 after he suffered a tyre failure that put him into a spin, which then broke apart on the pit straight and damaged the car's floor. Magnussen then received a €1,000 fine for speeding in the pit lane. Qualifying was the worst of the year as both drivers struggled with overheating and lack of aero in the thin air and qualified 18th and 19th. Gasly not setting a time prevented them filling up the back row, but grid penalties for Ricciardo, Hartley, Alonso and Van Dorn moved Magnussen up to 14th and Grosjean to 15th. Magnussen started the race on ultra soft tyres and Grosjean on super softs. Ricciardo passed Grosjean off the line. Van Dorn then passed him at turn 2. Magnussen passed Wehrlein at turn 3. Championship contenders Hamilton and Vettel collided at turn 3, which damaged Vettel's front wing and gave Hamilton a puncture. Magnussen passed Ericsson at turn 4 but was in turn passed by Ricciardo. Grosjean also passed Wehrlein there. Magnussen then passed a limping Hamilton at turn 5 and Grosjean passed Hamilton at turn 6. Vettel and Hamilton both pitted at the end of lap 1, leaving Magnussen 11th and Grosjean 14th. Carlos Sainz span on lap 2, which gave both drivers another place and put Magnussen in the points. Massa got a slow puncture on the first lap and pitted on lap 3, which gave both drivers another place. Ricciardo then retired on lap 5, which moved Magnussen up to 8th and Grosjean to 11th. Alonso started pressuring Grosjean, who cut turn 14 on lap 8. Alonso tried to pass Grosjean at turn 1 on lap 9 and they touched wheels, which damaged Grosjean's barrage board and floor. Hartley slipped through as well, which dropped Grosjean down to 13th. On lap 15, Grosjean was awarded a 5-second time penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. A recovering Vettel passed Grosjean at turn 1 on lap 18. Perez and Hülkenberg pitted on laps 18 and 19, which moved Magnussen up to 6th. Hülkenberg then retired on lap 24, which gave Grosjean a place. Ericsson pitted on lap 28, which moved Grosjean up to 12th. He was then lapped on lap 29. Perez passed Magnussen at turn 1 on lap 30. Gasly passed Grosjean on the run to turn 1 on lap 31, and then Massa passed him at turn 4. Hartley in front retired at the same time, which brought out the virtual safety car. Magnussen immediately pitted for a set of soft tyres and rejoined in 9th. Grosjean also pitted for a set of soft tyres, served his time penalty and rejoined in 15th. Alonso and Vettel pitted on laps 32 and 33, which moved Magnussen up to 7th. The virtual safety car then ended. A recovering Hamilton passed Grosjean on the run to turn 1 on lap 35. Vettel then passed Magnussen at turn 1 on lap 37. Magnussen was then lapped on lap 42. Ericsson retired on lap 55, which gave Grosjean a place. Sainz then retired from behind him on lap 59, leaving him last on track. Grosjean was lapped for a second time on lap 61. Alonso closed up to Magnussen in the second stint but was unable to get past him, and he finished a solid 8th, with Grosjean in 15th. The team are now only 1 point behind Renault in the Constructors' Championship. The season approached its end with the Brazilian Grand Prix. Giovinazzi took Magnussen's seat in FP2. Qualifying went better than in Mexico, with both drivers advancing into Q2 with Grosjean 12th and Magnussen 14th. A grid penalty for Ricciardo moved both drivers up a place. Both drivers started the race on super soft tyres. Van Dorn almost passed Grosjean at turn 1 but got squeezed out by Grosjean trying to pass Ocon. Magnussen went 3 abreast of Van Dorn and Ricciardo through the centre S. Van Dorn was squeezed by Magnussen and hit him, and then hit Ricciardo, which put him into a spin. Magnussen and Van Dorn both got race-ending suspension damage. Grosjean passed Ocon at Curva do Sol. Ocon tried to pass Grosjean around the outside of Ferradura. Grosjean had his left rear wheel snagged by Van Dorn at turn 1, which gave him a slow puncture. The car snapped and they collided and both span off into the runoff area. Ocon retired on the spot and Grosjean rejoined in 15th and the safety car was brought out. The drivers were redirected through the pit lane. Grosjean put on a set of soft tyres and rejoined just behind Wehrlein in 16th. The safety car came in at the end of lap 5. Ricciardo passed Grosjean at the centre S on lap 7, putting him in last. He had floor damage from the collision with Ocon and started to drop away from Wehrlein in front. On lap 22, he was awarded a 10-second time penalty for the collision with Ocon. Hartley pitted on lap 27 and Stroll on lap 28, which gave Grosjean 2 places. Stroll almost passed Grosjean at the centre S on lap 40. Hartley then retired from behind Grosjean and he was first lapped on lap 41. Stroll passed Grosjean on the start-finish straight on lap 45. Ericsson and Gasly pitted at the same time and rejoined behind Grosjean. Gasly passed Grosjean at Ferradura on lap 46. Grosjean pitted for a second set of super soft tyres on lap 49, served his penalty and rejoined 35 seconds behind Ericsson in 16th and last. He was lapped for a second time on lap 58. Stroll pitted on lap 67, which gave Grosjean a place, and he finished a disastrous race in 15th. The season reached its conclusion with the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. The team were only 6 points away from 6th in the Constructors' Championship. Giovinazzi took Magnussen's seat in FP1 for the final time. Grosjean completed only 12 laps in FP2 with problems with the electronics. Grosjean struggled with understeer in qualifying and was eliminated in Q1 to line up 16th. Massa was only a 10th faster and lined up 14th. Both drivers started the race on ultra-soft tyres. Magnussen tried to pass Van Dorn around the outside of turn 1 but was forced wide across the runoff area. He rejoined the track side by side with Lance Stroll but lost control at turn 3 and did a 360-degree spin and rejoined in 20th and last. Grosjean managed to pass Van Dorn at turn 8. Grosjean started pressuring Stroll early on and passed him at turn 8 on lap 6. Stroll, however, took the place back at turn 11. Magnussen passed Ericsson at turn 11 on lap 8. Grosjean tried once again to pass Stroll at turn 8 on lap 9, but Stroll did the switchback and got back past on the exit of the chicane. He then finally did get past him at turn 8 on lap 11. Stroll tried to take the place back again at turn 11, but Grosjean got ahead around the outside. Magnussen then passed Hartley at turn 11. Stroll pitted on lap 11 and Van Dorn on lap 12, which gave 2 places to Magnussen. Perez pitted on lap 16 and rejoined behind Grosjean. Gasly span at turn 20 on lap 16 and was passed by Magnussen. Hulkenberg pitted on lap 17 and also rejoined behind Grosjean. Hulkenberg swiftly passed Grosjean on the run to turn 8 on lap 18, but Grosjean took the place back at turn 11. Hulkenberg then did pass him there on the following lap. Grosjean took the place back once again at turn 1 on lap 20, but Hulkenberg then passed him for good at turn 8. Ricciardo retired on lap 21, which gave both drivers a place. Alonso pitted on lap 21, which put Grosjean in the points. Perez passed Grosjean at turn 8 on lap 22. Massa pitted on lap 22, which put Grosjean back in the points. Magnussen then pitted as well for a set of super soft tyres and rejoined in 19th and last. Hartley pitted on lap 26, which gave Magnussen a place. He was then lapped on lap 28. Verline, Stroll, Gasly, Ericsson and Ocon pitted on laps 28 to 31, and Sainz pitted on lap 31 and then pulled over with a loose wheel, which moved Magnussen up to 13th and Grosjean briefly up to 8th. Grosjean pitted for a set of super soft tyres on lap 32 and rejoined in 11th. He was lapped on lap 39. Grosjean ran the second stint alone and finished 11th, while Magnussen closed up to Van Dorn but couldn't get past and was 50 seconds behind in 13th. Haas's second season in Formula 1 had overall been an improvement over their first. The car had fairly good raw pace overall, particularly at the beginning of the season where it was clearly at the higher end of the midfield. However, clean race weekends were rare, and in the second half of the season their development slowed relative to their competitors and they drifted away from Force India and Renault and towards McLaren and Sauber. Their poor qualifying was masked by their good engine reliability, helping them profit from other teams' grid penalties for engine changes. A close-knit midfield battle ended with them finishing 8th in the Constructors' Championship once again, but having both drivers score points meant they went from 29 points to 47. Romain Grosjean largely had a better year than 2016. He scored most of the team's points and was more reliable than Magnussen, but still had braking problems and nearly always struggled with balance, meaning there were very few weekends where he could maximise the car's potential. He won the qualifying battle with Magnussen 12-8 but narrowly lost the race battle 6-7. Despite this, he scored more points and finished 13th in the Drivers' Championship with 28 points. Kevin Magnussen's aggressive driving style was more often than not a hindrance than a help. He was able to better get to grips with the car than Grosjean, and there were occasional flashes of brilliance such as in Baku, but he got involved in clashes with other drivers in almost every race and made a lot of enemies for himself on the grid. He lost the qualifying battle 8-12 and won the race battle 7-6 and finished 14th in the Drivers' Championship with 19 points. Join me for part 3 of this series, where we shall look at Haas's 2018 campaign. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Brook_F1, and I'll see you all next time.